Major Elena Vance watched the tiny German Shepherd puppy plant its feet in the center of the sidewalk, its unwavering, tactical gaze boring into her soul with a desperation that shattered her hardened military composure. This wasn't a stray looking for a meal. This was a warrior in a 3-month-old body delivering a silent, urgent plea for a life hanging by a thread in the dark woods of Blackwood. Before we uncover the devastating truth behind this puppy's mission, subscribe to the channel and follow this journey to the very end. Comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story of loyalty reaches. The sun hadn't even cleared the tree line when the rhythm of Elena's morning run was broken by a movement so deliberate it triggered every survival instinct she'd honed over a decade in the SEAL teams. She didn't see a pet. She saw a breach in the environment. A German Shepherd puppy, no more than 12 weeks old, she just stepped from between 2 parked cars and stood directly in her path, blocking the sidewalk with the calculated steadiness of a veteran point man. "Where's your handler, little one?" Elena whispered, her voice carrying the calm, authoritative rasp she'd used in Afghan firefights. The puppy didn't wag its tail. It didn't cower. It locked eyes with her, direct, unwavering, and hauntingly purposeful. Elena shifted her weight to the left, testing the animal's intent. The puppy mirrored her perfectly, squaring its shoulders to maintain the connection. It was watching her exactly the way a unit member watches a team leader for a signal. "This isn't random," Elena muttered, her pulse quickening as she recognized the behavior. "You're trying to tell me something." The puppy let out a whimper, not a cry for food, but a sharp, rhythmic signal that carried the weight of a tactical briefing. When Elena turned back toward her truck to reach for her radio, the puppy erupted into a panicked scramble, its tiny claws frantic against the pavement as it let out a scream of pure desperation. It wasn't the fear of being left behind. It was the agony of an expiring clock. "Show me," Elena commanded. The puppy turned instantly, moving toward a narrow, overgrown access trail that Elena had passed 100 times without ever really seeing. As they entered the brush, Elena's hand rested near her sidearm out of pure muscle memory. The pup moved with a discipline that should have been impossible. Lead confirm proceed, stopping every 10 feet to ensure Elena was still on its 6. "You're operating on pure instinct, aren't you?" Elena said, her eyes scanning the disturbed soil. Halfway down the trail, she saw it. A jagged drag mark cutting through the dead leaves, fresh within the last 24 hours. She knelt, her jaw tightening as she spotted a glint of metal. She recovered a broken zipper pull attached to a scrap of navy blue designer fabric. "Someone fought back here," Elena hissed, the professional operator in her taking over. The puppy trembled but didn't retreat, its eyes pleading for her to understand the urgency. As they pushed deeper, the residential sounds of garage doors and morning traffic vanished, replaced by an oppressive, heavy silence. They reached a small clearing where the violence was undeniable. Grass torn up by the roots, branches snapped at chest height, and dark, tacky stains at the base of a large tree. "Blood," Elena whispered, her fingers tracing the displacement in the dirt. "Who was it? Who are we looking for?" The puppy circled the area with a precision that would have shamed a K9 unit, eventually stopping near the edge of the clearing and pawing at a spider-webbed smartphone half buried in the mud. Elena lifted it with 2 fingers, preserving the prints. The screen flickered to life, illuminating a photo of a young woman in her mid-20s, laughing as she cradled this exact puppy in her arms. "That's your human," Elena said, her voice thick with a sudden crushing empathy. The puppy saw the screen and broke down, pressing its face against the cold glass and letting out a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. It was a sound that cut through every defense Elena had built since Gyeongju. She keyed her radio, her voice shifting into the lethal calm of a Lieutenant Reed calling in a sitrep. "Dispatch, this is Major Vance. I have a confirmed abduction site. Evidence of a violent struggle and significant blood loss. I need multiple units and EMS at my coordinates, now." This is not a drill. The response was immediate, but the puppy wasn't waiting for the cavalry. It began tracking again, following a trail of blood and drag marks that led toward a ravine where no civilian would ever wander. Every time the puppy froze, Elena froze. Every time it gave a sharp, controlled bark, she advanced with her weapon drawn. "There!" Elena breathed, spotting a massive fallen tree partially concealed by twisted roots and debris. Behind the trunk, they found her. The woman from the photo was lying in the mud, her face unrecognizable from the bruising, her skin pale and cold as death. She had been there all night, alone in the freezing forest. Elena dropped to her knees, her fingers searching for a pulse. Nothing but a faint, thready vibration. "Contact. Victim located, female, 25. Multiple trauma, significant exposure. Expedite medical." Elena roared into her radio. The puppy rushed to the woman's side, pressing its tiny, warm body against her chest, right over her heart. And then, a miracle happened. The woman's fingers twitched against the puppy's fur. "She's still fighting," Elena whispered, her voice cracking for the first time in years. As the paramedics swarmed the clearing, an officer on the scene began piecing together the horror of the previous night. The woman had been targeted by two men while jogging. They had beaten her and left her for dead, assuming the puppy would simply scatter or perish in the woods. They were catastrophically wrong. "He stayed with her," the officer said, looking at the tiny dog. "He shared his warmth to keep her heart beating through the frost. And when she stopped responding, he didn't run away. He ran for help." The puppy had searched the streets until he found the one person who wouldn't look at him as a lost pet, but as a teammate. He had chosen a Navy SEAL because he knew only a warrior would understand that the mission isn't over until everyone comes home. Elena sat in the hospital recovery room later that afternoon, watching the puppy sleep against her chest. His small body finally surrendered to exhaustion. "You did what warriors do," Elena whispered, her tears rolling silently onto the puppy's soft fur. "You never left her behind. You never quit. You're the bravest teammate I've ever served with." Major Elena Vance kept her eyes locked on the emergency room door, her hand instinctively tightening around the new leash she had just bought, while the puppy, Echo, remained huddled deep against her chest, his small legs occasionally twitching in a fitful dream. "He's dreaming about that battle, isn't he?" Elena thought, a sense of heartache seeping into her battle-hardened soul. She never thought she'd shed tears for such a tiny creature, but after seeing the desperate, tactical plea in his amber eyes that morning, her icy defenses had completely crumbled. A Navy SEAL who had survived the most brutal combat zones now felt humbled by the monumental loyalty of a 3-month-old pup. The doors swung open, and a doctor stepped out with an exhausted face but eyes sparkling with relief. "She made it through the critical stage, thanks to being kept warm and brought here during the golden hour," the doctor said, his voice trembling with emotion. Elena exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her, but her soldier's intuition immediately signaled that this was far from over. "Doctor, I need to know if there are any traces of the attackers left on her," Elena said, her voice hardening as she shifted back into operational mode in a split second. The doctor nodded, gesturing for her to follow him into a small lab where investigators were examining the final evidence. A police officer stepped forward, handing Elena a dynamic evidence bag containing the navy blue fabric scrap she had found in the woods. "You won't believe it, but we found the suspect's DNA," he said, his voice filled with amazement. Elena frowned. "DNA? From where?" The officer pointed toward Echo, Chitu, who had just woken up and was watching them with a guarded gaze. "From the bite marks on the attacker's hand, this little guy directly attacked them to protect his owner, and the blood samples on his teeth are the most damning evidence." Elena's heart constricted as she looked down at the scratches on Echo's paws. She realized this puppy hadn't just gone for help. He had truly fought in the war. But just as hope began to flicker, an alarm echoed through the hospital corridors, Chichi cutting the conversation short. Two strange men with suspicious appearances were trying to approach the intensive care unit. "They came back to erase the evidence," Elena hissed through gritted teeth, her SEAL instincts surging more powerful than ever. She had no weapon, only her bare hands and a small puppy still trembling from trauma. "Hey, can you hold Echo?" She turned to the officer, but the small dog had already jumped to the floor, standing in front of Elena and letting out a low, threatening growl. "All right, teammate, let's finish this," Elena said, her eyes as cold as a sniper's scope. She signaled Echo to be silent, and the two warriors began moving in a tactical formation through the corners of the hallway. The two strangers, a tall man with a long scar on his neck and a thin man holding a strange syringe, approached the young woman's hospital bed. "Damn it, they're going to inject poison," Elena cursed under her breath. She grabbed a stainless steel medical tray from a nearby table and threw it hard toward the opposite corner of the room to create a distraction. As predicted, the men spun around in a panic, creating a lethal opening. Elena lunged out like a whirlwind, her thunderous kick taking down the thin man instantly. But the scarred man was faster. He pulled out a switchblade and charged at Elena with a frenzied look. In the moment the blade was about to graze her shoulder, a small black shadow soared through the air. Echo clamped down hard on the man's knife-wielding wrist, his small but razor-sharp teeth sinking deep into the muscle. The man screamed in pain, the knife clattering to the floor with a hollow metallic thud. Elena didn't miss the opportunity. She delivered a hook punch that knocked him unconscious. The room fell into silence, save for Elena's heavy breathing and Echo's low growl. Hospital security flooded in, restraining the culprits while doctors rechecked the victim's status. Elena knelt, pulling Echo into her arms, feeling his small body still shivering with adrenaline. "You saved her again, Echo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As the police led the kidnappers away, one of them glared at Elena with pure hatred and muttered something that made her skin crawl. "You think this is over? This is just the beginning." Elena clenched her fist. She knew she couldn't just stand by. There was a larger conspiracy behind this abduction, and the cracked phone she was holding was likely the only key. She opened the phone once more, scrolling through the victim's final messages, and discovered a series of strange coordinates sent from an unidentified number. These coordinates, "They're at the abandoned mine north of town," Elena told herself, her SEAL memory of the terrain kicking in. She knew she had to act immediately before other accomplices could destroy evidence or cause more harm. But as she prepared to leave, Echo suddenly ran to the young woman's bedside, barking softly and nudging his owner's motionless hand with his head. He doesn't want to leave. He wants to stay and guard her, Elena realized, a deep sense of admiration for the small dog washing over her. She sat down next to Echo, stroking his fur. Listen, Echo. I have to go find the truth so she can be safe forever. Will you stay here and stand guard? The puppy looked at her, seemingly understanding every word. He let out a soft whine and then lay down at the foot of the hospital bed, his eyes never leaving the door. Elena smiled, a rare smile of complete trust. She stood up and walked out of the hospital into the now bright morning sun, but a storm was brewing in her heart. Who was this girl? Why did they want to kidnap her? And Echo, why was he so incredibly intelligent? Elena stepped into her vehicle, started the engine, and headed straight for the abandoned mine. The road ahead was shrouded in mist and filled with lurking dangers, but she no longer felt alone. She was fighting for Echo, for that young woman, and for the very honor of a soldier who never leaves a teammate behind. As her car passed the forest gates, she caught a glimpse of a figure watching from a distance, a mysterious black shadow that seemed to have been waiting for her for a long time. Elena gripped the steering wheel, her eyes shining with determination. The real battle was only just beginning. The puppy had finished his mission, and now it was time for a gray wolf like her to finish this final objective. She wasn't just going to save a person. She was finding herself again among the fragments of war and the salvation of a tiny creature. Would you like me to continue the story and reveal what Elena discovered at the abandoned mine? The tires of Elena's truck bit into the jagged gravel of the mountain road, the engine's roar echoing the violent thrumming in her chest as the hospital vanished in her rearview mirror. She could still feel the phantom weight of Echo against her collarbone, a reminder of the smallest teammate she had ever worked with. Her training as a Navy SEAL had taught her to compartmentalize fear, but the look in that puppy's eyes when he nudged his owner's motionless hand was a tactical breach she couldn't patch. She glanced at the cracked smartphone secured in a mount on her dashboard, the strange coordinates flickering like a taunt. "I've got you," she whispered into the empty cabin, repeating the iron promise she had made to teammates pinned down under enemy fire. The road narrowed, the comfortable residential streets giving way to a dense tree canopy that swallowed the morning light. Her pulse quickened as she approached the perimeter of the abandoned Blackwood mine. This wasn't a civilian site. It was a tactical blind spot where someone could vanish without a trace. She pulled the truck into a thicket of overgrown brush, killing the engine and moving with the disciplined precision of a decade of service. As she stepped out, the silence of the woods hit her, a heavy, watching silence that she had encountered in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan. She scanned the ground, her eyes instantly identifying out-of-place movements at ground level. There were fresh tire tracks, deep and heavy, indicating a vehicle larger than a standard sedan had passed through within the last few hours. "Show me the way, Echo," she murmured, though the puppy was miles away. She began to track the trail, her posture alert but relaxed, her every sense tuned to notice anything out of place. She found the first concrete evidence of her assessment: disturbed soil and drag marks cutting through the dirt and dead leaves. The drag marks were messy, indicating a struggle that had continued long after the initial attack in the clearing. Elena reached the entrance of the primary mine shaft, her hand resting near her sidearm out of pure habit. Suddenly, the smell of ozone and damp earth was cut by something else, the acrid scent of a high-grade sedative. She flattened herself against the cold stone of the mine entrance, her mind rapidly processing options. A muffled voice echoed from the darkness within, sharp and filled with a cold, professional detachment. The girl was just the bait. Where's the dog? We need the DNA from the bite to confirm the source. Elena's jaw tightened. They didn't just want the woman. They wanted Echo. The puppy had secured DNA evidence by biting the attacker's hand, and these men were cleaning the scene. The profound twist hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just a random abduction. It was a targeted hit to recover an experimental K9 lineage that Echo unknowingly carried. Elena didn't wait for backup. Instinct, the same instinct that had kept her alive through 7 combat deployments, told her she was out of time. She moved into the shadows of the shaft, her eyes scanning potential cover points and exit routes. She saw 2 men standing over a makeshift tactical desk, their faces illuminated by the harsh blue light of a laptop. One of them held a navy blue designer jacket, the same material as the scrap she'd recovered earlier. "The SEAL is coming," the taller man said, his voice grating. "The society doesn't leave loose ends." "Neither do I," Elena snapped, stepping into the light. The men reacted with professional speed, but Elena was a blur of motion forged in war zones. Baxi lunged forward, mirroring the puppy's desperate determination. She didn't use her weapon. She used her environment. She kicked a heavy equipment crate toward the first man, the metal clanging against the rock as he stumbled back. The second man reached for a suppressed pistol, but Elena closed the distance in 2 strides, her fingers moving with the calculated focus of a seasoned investigator. She disarmed him with a wrist lock that sent the gun skittering into the dark. The struggle was brief but brutal, a reconstruction of the violence she had seen in the clearing. She pinned the taller man against the mine wall, her forearm pressed against his throat. "Who is the society? Why do you want the pup?" she hissed. The man gasped, a terrifying smile spreading across his bruised face. "He's not a dog. He's an asset. And you just led us right back to the hospital." Elena's heart dropped into her stomach. She realized the mysterious figure she'd seen at the forest gate wasn't following her to the mine. They were using her departure to strike at the unguarded hospital room. She didn't kill the man. She incapacitated him with a tactical strike and sprinted back toward the entrance, her boots pounding against the uneven ground. She keyed her radio, her voice shifting into the controlled tone of an operator calling in critical information. "Dispatch, this is Major Vance. Divert all units to the hospital. The mine was a decoy. I repeat, the target is the victim and the K9 in the recovery ward." The response was a wall of static. They were jamming the frequencies. She was alone, exactly where the society wanted her. She reached her truck and slammed it into gear, the tires spraying gravel as she raced back toward the city. Her mind was a whirlwind of guilt and fury. Echo had trusted her, had looked into her eyes and seen a teammate who understood the meaning of never leave anyone behind. And she had left him. The woman lay in her hospital bed, alive only because a tiny creature refused to accept surrender, and Elena had left them both vulnerable. As she neared the hospital, she saw the black SUV from the forest gate parked across the entrance, the driver's side door hanging open. Elena didn't slow down. She aimed her truck directly at the SUV, the impact shattering her headlights and throwing her against the seatbelt. She scrambled out before the smoke had even cleared, her hand finding her weapon. The hospital was eerily quiet, the comfortable sounds of medicine replaced by a chilling stillness. She moved through the service entrance, her eyes scanning for angles of attack. She reached the recovery floor just as a suppressed shot shattered the glass of the nurse's station. She rounded the corner to find the puppy, Echo, standing in the middle of the hallway. He wasn't cowering, he wasn't running, He had planted his feet with surprising steadiness, locking eyes with a man in a tactical mask. The puppy barked, a sharp, controlled, specific bark that bide his owner precious seconds. The man leveled his weapon at the 3-month-old pup, his finger tightening on the trigger. "No!" Elena roared, her own weapon barking twice in rapid succession. The man fell, and Echo didn't flinch. He executed a deliberate turn and ran back into the woman's room. Elena followed, her breath catching as she saw the woman sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with shock, but her hand resting protectively on Echo's soft fur. The puppy had licked her face until she woke up, his devotion refusing to break even as the danger closed in. Sarah, the victim, looked at Elena with a gratitude that cut straight through her defenses. "He wouldn't let them near me," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. Elena knelt beside the bed, one hand on the woman's arm and the other on the puppy's head. Tears she rarely allowed herself to shed rolled silently down her cheeks. The mission wasn't over. The society was still out there, and they had seen what a Navy SEAL and a tiny German Shepherd could do when they operated as a unit. But as Elena watched the puppy shift closer to his human in his sleep, she felt a powerful connection to something bigger than herself. No rank, no orders, just love that refused to surrender. She stood slowly, her entire body shifting back into operational mode. "They're coming back," she told Sarah, her voice carrying an iron promise. "And this time, the whole team is ready." Elena gripped the cold metal of her sidearm, her eyes darting from the shattered glass of the nurse's station to the small, defiant form of Echo standing guard at the foot of Sarah's bed. The hospital's emergency lights pulsed a rhythmic, bloody red, mirroring the frantic beat of her heart as the reality of the society's reach began to settle in her marrow. "We're leaving, Sarah. Right now," Elena commanded, her voice a low, lethal rasp that brooked no argument. Sarah, still pale and trembling from the night's exposure, clutched Echo to her chest, the puppy's small heart hammering against her own with a shared desperation. Elena didn't wait for the elevators. She knew they were kill zones in a tactical breach. She led them toward the service stairs, every sense tuned to the sound of heavy, disciplined footsteps echoing from the floor below. They hit the stairwell just as a muffled explosion rocked the floor they had just vacated, the shockwave rattling the fire door in its frame. Elena felt a surge of cold fury. These men weren't just kidnappers. They were scorched earth operatives. "Down! Stay behind me!" she hissed, her body shielding the woman and the pup as she scanned the landing below. Echo gave a sharp, controlled bark, his nose pointed toward the gap in the stairs where a shadow was moving with unnatural speed. Elena fired twice, the suppressed rounds whispering through the air with a precision that sent the shadow tumbling into the darkness. The mini-climax of the descent hit as they reached the parking garage, only to find the exit blocked by a black sedan, its engine idling like a growling beast. Elena didn't hesitate. She shoved Sarah into the back of a nearby transport van, her fingers flying over the ignition wires with the practiced speed of a SEAL who had stolen more than her fair share of enemy vehicles. Echo, get in!" she shouted, her mind momentarily slipping back to the war zones of her past. The puppy leaped into the van, his amber eyes locked on Elena's with a quiet, steady trust that made her throat tighten. They burst through the garage gate, the van's tires screaming as they bit into the wet pavement. But the major twist was already waiting for them in the rearview mirror. It wasn't just the society following them. It was a state-level tactical team, their sirens silent, but their intent clear in the way they boxed Elena into the narrow mountain pass. They've compromised the local authorities, Sarah. The society isn't a gang. It's a cancer, Elena muttered, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Sarah gripped the headrest, her voice a thin, terrified whisper. Why? Why do they want him so badly? Elena glanced at the puppy, who was now standing on the seat, his nose pressed to the window as he watched the pursuing lights. Because he survived the night when you weren't supposed to. He's the only witness who can't be bought off, she replied, her gaze hardening. The chase escalated as the mountain road began to climb, the van struggling against the steep incline, while the black sedans gained ground with every turn. Elena saw a gap in the guardrail, a logging trail she had scouted during her morning runs. It was a suicide move for a civilian, but for a SEAL, it was a tactical pivot. "Brace yourselves!" she roared, slamming the wheel to the right and launching the van into the dense, snow-heavy brush. The impact was a symphony of crunching metal and snapping branches, the van sliding dangerously close to the edge of a ravine before finally coming to a rest against a massive pine. Silence followed, thick and suffocating, until the puppy gave a low, vibrating growl, his hackles rising like wire. Elena kicked the door open, the smell of gasoline and damp earth filling the cabin. "We move on foot. Echo, lead!" she commanded, trusting the dog's nose more than any map. They moved through the dark woods, the terrain growing rougher and more uneven with every step, the residential world fading into a memory of light. Echo moved with a discipline that felt like an echo of Elena's own training, stopping every 10 yards to ensure they were still on his 6, his floppy ears pitching forward at every snap of a twig. The mini cliffhanger hit when they reached a clearing that looked hauntingly familiar, the site of the initial attack. But this time, it wasn't empty. A man stood in the center of the churned earth, his face obscured by a tactical mask, holding a remote detonator. "You should have stayed at the hospital, Lieutenant Reed," the man said, his voice carrying the cold weight of a command headquarters briefing. Sarah gasped, her fingers digging into Elena's shoulder as she recognized the voice. You were there," she whispered, the trauma of the night flooding back into her eyes. The major twist was revealed when the man pulled back his mask, not showing a face Elena had seen on her own tactical briefings months ago. A SEAL commander thought to have been KIA in the mountains of Afghanistan. "The society is the elite, Elena. We protect the world from the chaos you're currently causing," he said, his finger hovering over the button. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her. The war she thought she had left behind had followed her home in the most twisted way possible. "You aren't protecting anything, Miller. You're just another hunter," Elena spat, her hand moving toward her holster with a lethal clarity. Echo stepped forward then, his tiny body planted between Elena and the commander, his amber eyes locked on the detonator with a terrifying ancient focus. The puppy didn't bark. He executed a deliberate 3-step turn and looked back at Elena, a signal she finally understood from the earlier trail. He wasn't just showing her where the victim was. He was showing her the trap. The drag marks, they weren't just from the struggle. They were for the sensors, Elena realized, her heart dropping as she saw the faint glint of wires beneath the dead leaves. Miller laughed, a sound that carried no joy, only the madness of a man who had seen too much combat. "The puppy knows, doesn't he? He's the only one who can navigate the grid." Elena looked at Echo, seeing the warrior's code written in the way he stood his ground against a threat 10 times his size. The mini-climax erupted as the first tactical team breached the tree line, the air filling with the sharp crack of rifle fire. Elena lunged for Sarah, pulling her behind the massive fallen tree while Echo disappeared into the brush, his small form a ghost in the shadows. "Echo, get back here!" Sarah screamed. But the puppy was already on mission. Elena watched as the tiny German shepherd navigated the sensor grid with a precision that defied logic. His oversized paws never once triggering the pressure plates she could now see in the dirt. He reached Miller in a blur of mahogany fur, launching himself not at the man's throat, but at the hand holding the detonator. The commander roared in surprise, the device flying from his hand as Echo's teeth found the thinnest part of his tactical glove. Elena didn't waste the opening. She fired a single, calculated shot that disabled the detonator before it hit the ground. The tension reached a fever pitch as Elena and Miller faced off in the center of the blood-stained clearing, the tactical teams closing in from all sides. But it was Echo who stood at the center of the world, his small chest heaving with exhaustion, but his spirit refusing to quit. Elena saw it then, the heartbreaking reason why the puppy had followed her. He wasn't just looking for a seal. He was looking for someone who could finish the war so he could finally go home. She knelt in the mud, her hand resting on the pup's soft fur as the sirens finally began to wail in the distance. "We're going to end this, Echo, for her and for you," she whispered, her voice an iron promise that echoed through the trees. "Elena siet chat bang sung, kam han hoi lan kua kim luai tham kualop gang tai chien tuat ki tien koik se kan sat se toang bau kong ki jaks kwan mui tuok sung va suong muoi kua vung Blackwood. Miller jong jo, giwa tam giem kua tran jo kam bien. Ahmad gan shua jung mot su jien romachin hung ke jan lun kwa sau vau bong toi kua quien luk moi ko de so hu. Kong hiku vien jen la ket thuk sao Elena, ho kong jen je bat toi, ho jen je thu hoi tai san. Miller kuoi gan, gyong noi vang len jai ve jak thang giwa tien gam ru kua jong ko jang cape chat vong vai. Elena kong jap loi, kochi kera hiu cho sara lui sao hon vao sao tan kai ko tu, trong ki echo van jung jo, bolong nau jo dung jung. Joy mat hofash kong, roi khoi ban, tai jang ri mauk chuagan chi hui fan boy. Mot luong sang shoi mat tu jen fa kua joy jackson hiem kwet kwa kurang. Bien ihung hang thong than hung bong man hai mua. Jotten hien, echo gam gu mot am than la lung, chu chon hok soaing guoi. Thuk hien mot vong chai chien thuat vong kwan Elena. Joy chan ho be kua no ko tin giam len hung giem mu maga Miller kong ngo toi. Elenan han rang gai lap tuch. Echo kong fai jang hoang lon. No jang jan dao mot loi thoat antoan nam nguai mang luoi cambien. Sara, ji theo dao chan kua echo, ngai bai gio. Elena het len, jai ko gai tre ve fia mon suong mu dai jak. Miller jin lao toin hung mot vien jan kua Elena gam gai duoi chan ga, buok ga fai kung lai giua lan ran sin tu. Tran kien no radudoi hin hung bong jen tu bia rung bat jau no sung. Kong fai vao Miller, ma la vao chin joi kan sat jia fuong jang tien vao. Chet tiet. Chung la quan joi tun han. Elena rit kwa kerang, ko hiu rang, the society jan mua chuok kan hung kap bach kaon hat. Gualan jan jan sen, eko bat ngo lau vut ji. Kong fai che tron ma la huang thang ve fia chiet, xe hui jang dan jau joan xe jen. Ego kwai lai, sarathet len trong tuyet vong, nhung chu chon ho jan bien mat trong lum kai bui. Ku twist chan jong noraki chiet, xe hui jot ngot mat lai. Jam sam vao got kai lon ngai satria vuts. Tau ra mot vunokin huang, ngan chan huan tuan juang tien kua tuan kwan tun han. Elena tan dung kuan khach hon loan joje apsat Miller, joy ban tai kua mot jasen hiem seal, di chuyen voi tok jo kua mot kon lok. Ko kong dung sung, ko muon gam phai tragia bang hung jon kan chien jiao jon hat vi jam fan boy loi the kua mot ngoi lin. Moi ku jam kua Elena ju mang theo suk nang kua supan no dan cho ke jan han hung mot ko gai vo toi va jai mot chu chon ho va cho chet. Miller guk shuong. Hoi to jut kwang, nhunga van kip tot ramot kau kwoi kung truok kibatin. Tatka chung ta, ju la kwan ko. Elena jung day, mo hoi hoa kung mau chai dai tren ma, ko kwai lai nhin man suong jang dan tan bien. Fia sao jong jonat kua chiesche, eko lao jiao buokra, bo long din jai bui jat va mot vet tuong dai tren hong, nhung ham rang no van jang ngam chat mot chies o kung mau bak. Thu ma Miller jang ko tin giao trong hop kai tuat kua chiekse chi hai. Chu chon ho tien ve fia Elena. Da chico kung suong chan ko va keren mo ting jai met moi. Sara chaitoi, kui thup suong om cham lai eko. Hung giot nuok mat han fuk vo oa tren guong mat nhoten hat. Elena kam thai mot su rung jong man liet trong long nguk. Mot kam giach ku rui mako chua tung tim thai so hang chuk niem vu o hang guai. Jank song rue echo. Niem vu jan huan tan. Elena thi tham, ko kwik suong ben kan hang guai jong joai moa kwa min. Ban tay jatn helen jao chu chon ho. Ko biet rang chieks okang nai chua jung moi dan sash. Moi signatures kua the society. Juje kwet sash kan ben ung thu nai koi he thong. Mo truk thang ku hok suat hien tren jin jao. Luong gio tu kan kwat toi ben hung man vun kuoi kang kua noi so hai. Elenan hin vao joy mat kua echo. Tai trong jo mot sutin tuong tuyet joy. Mot long trung than kong kan kwan ham hei huan chuong. Nhau gio sao, tai mot kan ku kwan su bi mat nam nanguai tam kiem soat kua society. Elenangoi kwan sat sera jang nangusei. Voi eko kwan tron ben kan nhu mot vesin ho be kong bao gio roi vitri. Ko jang gui to an bo du liu chon hung guoi jong joy kuma ko thuk sutin tuong o Washington. Kong li se juok thuk thi, an hung Elena biet rang chien thang thuk su kong nam, on hung ban an, ma nam o su song sot kua mot tam hon yu ot truok bao luk tan bao. Chu chon ho jang kong chi ku chu kua min, no jang ku lai niem tin vao tin, ngoi trong long mot ngoi lin jang tung mat tat ka. Elena buok raban kong. Nhin ve fia chan troi noi ant nang bat jao suoi am vung iron bay. Kon han rarang min kong kon la mot bong makua chien tran. Ko lang guai bao ve kuan hung gi kui gian hat. Long trung than va su hi sin kong vu loi. Eko tin giak. Chu chon hoji toi ben kan ko. Kedui jau vao joy kuang guoi jaks nhiem jan traloi tiengoi kua no. Elena mim quoi, mot nu quoi rang ro va tu do, ko biet rang han trin qua ho moi chituk su bat jau. Longdung kam kong, baugio putuok vau kichko haivu ki, manamo mot traitim kong baugio biet jau hang truok kaias. Longdung kam tuk su la kong baugio bolai jong joai fia sao, du ho jong tren hai chan hai bon chan, boi vitrong the gioi nai, long trong than shin la vu ki tui thuong het.